The advertisement in the dusty window of Fort Bowie's general store had been there for 3 months, yellowed and curling at the edges. But Florence Freeman refused to take it down despite the whispers that followed him through the Arizona Territory streets. He needed a teacher for his daughter, and he did not care what anyone thought about a widowed rancher hiring an unmarried woman to live under his roof. The year was 1878, and opportunities for women were scarce enough that Florence expected someone desperate would eventually answer his call. What he did not expect was the woman who stepped off the stagecoach on a scorching July afternoon, her dark hair pulled back in a sensible bun, her green eyes surveying Fort Bowie with the kind of careful assessment that suggested she saw more than most people wanted to reveal. Jane Harper carried a single worn carpet bag and wore a gray traveling dress that had seen better days but was meticulously clean. She stood on the wooden sidewalk outside the depot, ignoring the stares of the cowboys loitering near the saloon, and asked the station manager in a clear, steady voice where she might find Florence Freeman's ranch. Florence happened to be in town that day, collecting supplies, when old Pete from the depot came running to find him. "That schoolteacher you've been advertising for. She is here." He turned from the counter at Henderson's Mercantile, his weathered hand still holding the list of provisions he needed. "She? Woman name of Harper. Looks like she means business too." Florence had corresponded with a J. Harper from Boston, but the letters had been formal, discussing educational philosophy and salary expectations. Somehow he had assumed J. Harper was a man. He wiped his palms on his trousers and followed Pete outside. Jane stood waiting, her posture perfect despite what must have been an exhausting journey. When their eyes met, Florence felt something shift in his chest, an uncomfortable sensation he had not experienced in the 5 years since his wife Margaret had died giving birth to their daughter. "Miss Harper." His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Mr. Freeman." She extended her hand like a man would, firm and businesslike. "I trust my letters arrived in good order." Her palm was soft against his calloused skin, but her grip was confident. "They did. I apologize for the confusion. I did not realize you were a woman. Would it have made a difference?" Her chin lifted slightly, a challenge in those green eyes. He thought about it honestly. "No, my daughter needs an education and your credentials are impressive, but folks around here will talk. I suspect folks around here would talk regardless." She glanced at the watching townspeople with an expression of mild disdain. "I am here to teach, Mr. Freeman, not to win popularity contests." A smile tugged at his mouth before he could stop it. "Fair enough. Let me finish my business here and I will take you out to the ranch. It is about an hour's ride. I can wait." She moved to a bench in the shade, settled herself with her bag at her feet and pulled out a book. Within moments, she appeared completely absorbed, oblivious to the continuing stares. Florence found his concentration scattered as he completed his errands. He kept glancing at the woman on the bench, noting the graceful line of her neck, the way her lips moved slightly as she read. When he finally loaded the wagon and gestured for her to join him, she marked her page carefully and climbed up beside him without complaint about the lack of a proper carriage. The road to his ranch wound through scrubland dotted with mesquite and the occasional saguaro cactus standing like sentinels against the bright sky. The heat was relentless, but Jane did not complain, merely adjusted her bonnet and watched the landscape pass. "Tell me about your daughter," she said after they had traveled in silence for several minutes. Florence gripped the reins tighter. "Emma is 8 years old. She is smart, curious, maybe too much for her own good sometimes. She can read a little, what I have taught her, and she knows her numbers. But I cannot give her what she needs. I am a rancher, not a scholar. What happened to her mother, The direct question surprised him. Most people danced around the subject. Margaret died in childbirth. Emma survived. Sometimes I think my daughter blames herself, though she was just a baby. Children often carry burdens that do not belong to them. Jane's voice was softer now. I will do my best to help her shed those if I can. Why did you come all the way from Boston to teach one child in the middle of nowhere? She was quiet for so long he thought she would not answer. Finally, she said, because in Boston, women like me have very few choices. I could be a governess in some wealthy household, invisible and voiceless, or I could marry a man chosen for practical reasons rather than affection. Neither option appealed to me. Here, at least, I have the chance to make my own way. It is not easy out here. I did not come looking for easy, Mr. Freeman. They fell silent again, but it was a more comfortable quiet now, broken only by the creak of the wagon wheels and the calls of desert birds. The ranch appeared as they crested a low rise, a sprawling collection of buildings clustered around a main house built of adobe and wood. Corrals held horses and cattle, and several men worked in the distance, their figures wavering in the heat. It was modest but well-maintained, speaking of hard work and careful management. A small figure burst from the house as they approached, a girl with blonde braids flying behind her and a dress that had clearly seen rough play. She ran barefoot through the dust, and Florence felt the familiar mixture of love and helplessness that his daughter always inspired. You brought her. You really brought a teacher. Emma skidded to a stop beside the wagon, her blue eyes wide with excitement and apprehension. Emma, this is Miss Harper. Miss Harper, my daughter Emma. Jane climbed down from the wagon with surprising agility and knelt in the dust so she was eye level with the girl. Hello, Emma. I am very pleased to meet you. Emma studied her with the brutal honesty of children. You are pretty. Are you going to marry my papa? Emma. Florence felt heat rise in his face that had nothing to do with the sun, but Jane laughed, a genuine sound that transformed her serious face. I am here to be your teacher, not to marry anyone, though I appreciate the compliment. Oh. Emma looked disappointed. Papa needs a wife. He gets lonely. That is enough. Florence's voice came out sharper than he intended, and he saw Emma's face fall. He softened his tone. Why do not you show Miss Harper to her room? She has had a long journey. The house was cool inside, thick adobe walls keeping out the worst of the heat. Florence had prepared the spare room off the kitchen, the one that had belonged to Margaret's mother before she passed. It was small but had a window that looked out on the vegetable garden and a door that could be locked from the inside, which he thought might be important to a woman living among strangers. Emma chattered constantly as she led Jane through the house, pointing out everything from the pump in the kitchen to the bearskin rug in the main room that she claimed her father had killed with his bare hands. Florence followed behind, carrying Jane's bag, and found himself seeing his home through her eyes. It was clean but sparse, functional rather than comfortable, the home of a man who had forgotten how to make a house feel lived in. This is very nice, Jane said when Emma threw open the door to her room. It was a lie, kind but transparent. The room held a narrow bed, a washstand, and a wooden chest. Florence had put fresh linens on the bed that morning and placed wildflowers in a jar on the windowsill, a gesture that now seemed pathetically inadequate. I will work on making it more comfortable, he said gruffly. Bookshelf, a better chair, whatever you need for teaching. It is fine, truly. Jane set her bag on the bed. I have lived in far worse. Emma bounced on her toes. Can we start lessons tomorrow? I want to learn everything. Tomorrow is Sunday, Florence reminded her. We will go to church and Miss Harper can rest. Lessons start Monday. The disappointment on Emma's face was profound, but she nodded. Jane touched the girl's shoulder gently. Use tomorrow to think about what you most want to learn. We will start with that on Monday." That night, after Emma was in bed, Florence and Jane sat on the porch in the cooling darkness. He had offered her coffee, which she accepted, and they listened to the sounds of the desert settling into night. "Thank you for coming," he said finally. "I know this is not what you expected." "What makes you think that? You are from Boston. This must seem like the edge of the world." She smiled, her face barely visible in the lamplight spilling from the window. "The edge of the world has its appeal. In Boston, everything is decided, set in stone. Here it feels like anything could happen. Out here, that is not always a good thing. Perhaps not, but it is honest at least." She turned to look at him, and in the dim light her eyes were dark and serious. "Your daughter is lovely. You have done well with her. I have done my best, but she needs more than I can give her. She needs what every child needs: love, guidance, education, and the freedom to become who she is meant to be. That is a tall order for a place like this. I think you underestimate yourself, Mr. Freeman." He shook his head. "I know my limitations, Miss Harper. I am good with cattle and horses. I can build a fence and break a wild Mustang. But teaching a girl to be a lady, to have the kind of future she deserves, that is beyond me." "Who says she has to be a lady?" Jane's voice held a hint of steel. "Perhaps she should simply be educated, capable, and strong enough to choose her own path." He considered that, this idea that had never quite formed in his own mind but had lurked there nonetheless. "You are different from what I expected." "So are you." The next morning, Florence hitched the wagon for the trip to Fort Bowie's small church. Emma wore her best dress, a blue calico that was already getting too short, and Jane appeared in a dark green dress that brought out her eyes. They rode to town in companionable silence, Emma between them, swinging her legs and humming. The church service was predictable. Reverend Potter preached about the prodigal son while the congregation sweltered in their Sunday clothes. But the real event happened afterward, when the women of Fort Bowie descended on Jane with questions that were only marginally polite. Florence watched as Jane handled them with grace, answering inquiries about her background, her qualifications, and her intentions without revealing anything truly personal. She met the assessing stares of the ranchers' wives with calm dignity, and by the time they returned to the wagon, he felt an unexpected surge of admiration. "That was awful," Emma declared as they drove away. "Mrs. Henderson asked me if Miss Harper was going to try to steal you away from proper ladies." "Emma," Florence felt anger flash through him, but Jane laughed. "What did you tell her?" "I said you were too smart to want to marry a smelly rancher anyway." Despite himself, Florence laughed too, and the tension broke like a summer storm passing. Monday morning arrived with Emma bouncing out of bed before dawn. Florence found her already dressed and sitting at the kitchen table when he came in from the barn. "It is barely light out," he said, amused despite himself. "I did not want to be late for lessons." Jane emerged from her room looking fresh despite the early hour. She had transformed the kitchen table into a makeshift classroom, with slates and chalk she had brought from Boston, along with books and papers. Florence left them to it, heading out to work the ranch with his hands. But throughout the day, he found himself drifting closer to the house, hearing Jane's patient voice explaining arithmetic, then geography, then reading aloud from a book of poetry that made Emma giggle. At lunch, he found them bent over a map, Emma's finger tracing the route from Boston to Arizona Territory. "It is so far," Emma breathed. "Were you scared?" "Sometimes," Jane admitted, "but I was more excited than scared. There is a whole world out there, Emma, and I wanted to see as much of it as I could. I want to see it too someday. Then we will make sure you are prepared for that adventure." Florence cleared his throat from the doorway and both looked up. I did not mean to interrupt. You are not, Jane assured him. We were just taking a break. Emma has been working very hard. Emma beamed at the praise, and Florence felt his heart swell. His daughter had never looked happier. The days settled into a rhythm. Jane worked with Emma each morning, covering reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and science with a thoroughness that impressed Florence. In the afternoons, she insisted Emma have time to play and help with chores, believing that practical skills were as important as book learning. Florence found himself looking forward to the evenings, when Emma would demonstrate what she had learned that day and Jane would sit with them, sometimes mending or reading, always a calm presence in the house that had been too quiet for too long. One evening, about 2 weeks after Jane's arrival, Emma fell asleep early, exhausted from a day of lessons and helping Florence in the barn. He and Jane sat on the porch again, watching the sun set in brilliant streaks of orange and red. She is doing remarkably well, Jane said. Emma is bright and eager to learn. Given the right opportunities, she could do anything she wanted. That is because of you. It is because of both of us. You have raised a confident, curious child. I am simply building on the foundation you created. He shook his head. I kept her alive and loved. You are giving her a future. Florence. It was the first time she had used his given name, and the sound of it on her lips made his pulse quicken. Do not diminish what you have done. Single parenthood is hard anywhere, but out here, with all the demands of the ranch and no help, you should be proud. I am proud of her, but I know my failings. We all have those. She was quiet for a moment, then said, May I ask what happened to your wife? You do not have to answer if it is too painful. He had not talked about Margaret in years, not really. But somehow, in the gathering darkness with Jane beside him, the words came easier than he expected. We married young. I was 20, she was 18. Her father owned the ranch next to my father's land. It made sense to everyone, and we thought we were in love. He paused, remembering. Maybe we were in our way, but it was not what I thought love should be. We were friends, partners, but there was always something missing. What was missing? Passion, understanding, the feeling that she truly saw me and I truly saw her. We were playing the roles we thought we should play. He rubbed his face. That sounds terrible. She was a good woman and she died too young. I should not speak ill of her. You are not speaking ill of her. You are being honest about the complexities of marriage. Not every union is a grand romance, and that does not mean it has value. After she died, I promised myself I would never marry again unless it was for real love, the kind of love where you would rather die than live without the other person. Emma deserves to see that kind of love, not another convenient arrangement. Jane was silent, and he worried he had said too much, but when she spoke, her voice was gentle. I think that is admirable. Too many people settle for less than they deserve. Is that why you never married? Partially. In Boston, the men who courted me wanted a decorative wife, someone to pour tea and look pretty at parties. When they learned I had opinions and ambitions, they quickly moved on to more biddable prospects. She smiled wryly. I was not devastated by their departure, their loss. She turned to look at him, and in the fading light her face was soft with surprise. That is kind of you to say. It is the truth. He held her gaze, feeling the air between them change, charged with something new and unnamed. You are remarkable, Jane. In the short time you have been here, you have changed everything. Emma is happier, the house feels alive again, and I find myself actually looking forward to coming inside at the end of the day. Florence. She said his name like a question, uncertain and hopeful at once. He stood abruptly, suddenly aware that he was moving too fast, feeling too much. I should check on the horses before full dark. Of course. Was that disappointment in her voice? He could not tell. He walked to the barn through the purple twilight, his heart pounding. What was he doing? She had been here only 2 weeks. She was here to teach his daughter not to become involved with a rancher twice her age. Except he was not twice her age. He was 33, and he judged her to be in her mid-20s. Still, she was educated, refined, from a different world. He had no business developing feelings for her, but the feelings were there regardless, growing stronger each day. Inside the barn, he leaned against a stall door and tried to collect himself. One of the horses, a bay mare named Molly, nuzzled his shoulder in sympathy. "I am in trouble," he told the horse. "Real trouble." The mare whickered as if she understood. When he returned to the house, Jane had gone to her room, and he told himself it was for the best. He needed to maintain distance, propriety. Emma's education was what mattered, not his inconvenient attraction to her teacher. But over the following weeks, maintaining distance proved impossible in the close quarters of the ranch. Jane was everywhere, her presence transforming the house in ways both large and small. She brought wildflowers inside and arranged them in jars. She hummed while she cooked, teaching Emma songs from her childhood. She started a small herb garden near the kitchen door, explaining that fresh herbs made everything taste better. The men who worked the ranch quickly developed deep respect for her. When Jane asked Florence if she could teach Emma to ride properly, the cowboys fell over themselves offering to help. Within a week, Emma was cantering around the corral on a gentle mare, Jane beside her on a spirited chestnut gelding, her posture perfect and her smile bright. Florence watched from the fence, struck by the picture they made together. Emma was laughing, completely at ease, and Jane's normally serious face was alight with joy. This was what his daughter needed, what he had been unable to give her alone. Female companionship, someone to show her that women could be strong and capable and educated all at once. "That lady teacher of yours is something special, boss," said his foreman, a grizzled cowboy named Walt who had worked the ranch since Florence's father's time. "She is just doing her job." Walt gave him a knowing look. "If you say so. But seems to me she is doing a lot more than teaching letters and numbers." Florence had no answer to that. In late August, a dust storm rolled in from the west, turning the sky orange and forcing everyone indoors. Florence secured the animals and made sure the house was buttoned up tight, while Jane and Emma prepared supplies in case the storm lasted days. They huddled inside as the wind howled and dust found its way through every crack and crevice. Florence tried to read while Emma practiced her penmanship, but his attention kept drifting to Jane, who sat near the window watching the storm with fascination rather than fear. "I have never seen anything like this," she said. "It is terrifying and beautiful at the same time." "Welcome to Arizona territory," he said dryly. Emma put down her slate. "Tell us a story, Papa, like you used to when I was little." "I am not much of a storyteller, please. Miss Harper has never heard your stories." He started to refuse, but Jane said, "I would love to hear a story, please." So he found himself recounting the tale of how his grandfather had come west, leaving Kentucky with nothing but a horse and determination. He told of encounters with Apache warriors that ended in friendship rather than violence, of floods and droughts, and the constant struggle to build something lasting in an unforgiving land. Jane and Emma listened raptly, and as he spoke, Florence felt something loosen in his chest. He had not talked about his family history in years, had almost forgotten the stories his own father had told him. "Your grandfather sounds like a remarkable man," Jane said when he finished. "He was stubborn and foolhardy and lucky, which is what it took to survive out here. Those same qualities served you well, I imagine. I suppose." He met her eyes across the room. though sometimes I wonder if I am just stubborn and foolhardy and the luck has run out. I do not think your luck has run out at all. She held his gaze, and the message in her eyes was clear. She saw him, truly saw him in a way no one had in years. Emma yawned hugely, breaking the moment. "I am tired." "To bed with you then," Florence said. "Storm or no storm, you need your sleep." After Emma was settled, Florence and Jane sat together in the main room, listening to the wind. The storm had knocked out the lamps, so they sat in darkness broken only by the glow from the fireplace. "Are you sorry you came?" he asked quietly. "No. Are you sorry you hired me?" "Not for a moment." He hesitated, then said what had been building in him for weeks. "Jane, I need to be honest with you. My feelings for you have grown beyond employer and employee, beyond friendship even. I think about you constantly. I find excuses to be near you. When you smile, it feels like the sun coming out." He heard her breath catch. "Florence, I know it is inappropriate. I know you are here to teach Emma, not to be courted by her father. But I cannot keep pretending I do not feel what I feel. If it makes you uncomfortable, if you want to leave, I will arrange it and give you enough money to start over wherever you choose." But I had to tell you the truth. The silence stretched so long he thought he had ruined everything. Then Jane spoke, her voice trembling slightly. "I have been trying not to fall in love with you since the moment I arrived. I told myself I was here for a job, for independence, not for romance. But every day I fall a little more. The way you are with Emma, so gentle and patient. The way you treat your men with respect. The way you look at the land like it is a living thing you are trying to understand. I cannot help myself." He crossed the room in 3 strides, pulled her to her feet, and kissed her. She melted against him, her arms coming up around his neck, and it was everything he had imagined and more. She tasted like the peppermint tea she favored, and her body fit against his like she was made to be there. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Jane Harper. I know it is fast, but I am certain of it." "I love you too," she laughed, a sound of pure joy. "This is madness. I have been here less than 2 months. Is it madness if it feels more real than anything else in my life?" "No." She kissed him again, softer this time. "No, it is not madness at all." They sat together on the old sofa, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her, and talked through the night as the storm raged outside. They spoke of their pasts, their fears, their hopes for the future. Jane told him about growing up the daughter of a failed businessman, how she had fought for every scrap of education she received. Florence talked about the weight of inheriting the ranch at 21 when his father died, of trying to live up to a legacy he did not always understand. "I was so lonely after Margaret died," he admitted as the first light of dawn began to filter through the dust-choked windows. "Not just for adult companionship, but for someone who understood me, someone I could be fully myself with. You do not have to be lonely anymore." Jane laced her fingers through his. "I am here and I am not going anywhere." "What about Emma? We should not tell her yet, should we?" "It might confuse her," Jane smiled. "Florence, your daughter has been trying to get us together since the moment I arrived. I suspect she will be thrilled." She was right. When Emma woke and found them sitting together at breakfast, their happiness evident, she shrieked with delight and threw herself at Jane. "I knew it. I knew Papa would fall in love with you. How could I not?" Florence said, catching Jane's eye over Emma's head. "She is perfect." The next few months were the happiest of Florence's life. Jane continued teaching Emma, who thrived under her guidance, but their relationship had deepened into something more familial. In the evenings, they sat together like a family, reading or talking or simply enjoying each other's company. Florence courted Jane properly, despite living under the same roof. He brought her flowers from the desert, took her riding to show her the most beautiful parts of the ranch, and sat with her under the stars talking about everything and nothing. In October, as the brutal summer heat finally broke, he proposed. He did it simply, without fanfare, on the porch where they had first admitted their feelings. He got down on one knee, offered her his grandmother's ring that he had been saving, and asked her to be his wife. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely yes." They married in November in the small church at Fort Bowie, with Emma standing up as Jane's attendant and Walt serving as Florence's best man. The whole town turned out, curiosity overcoming any lingering disapproval. Reverend Potter performed the ceremony, and when Florence kissed his bride, he felt his whole world click into place. The wedding breakfast was held at the ranch, with long tables set up outside to accommodate everyone. The cowboys had cleaned up remarkably well, and the townspeople mingled with surprising ease. Florence watched Jane move through the crowd, gracious and warm, and marveled that this brilliant, beautiful woman had chosen him. Emma was incandescent with joy, racing around in her new dress and declaring to anyone who would listen that she had known all along they would get married. As the sun set and the guests began to depart, Florence pulled Jane aside. "Are you happy?" deliriously. She kissed him, not caring who saw. "I came here thinking I was starting a new life as a teacher. I never imagined I would find a family, a home, and the love of my life all at once. I was dead inside before you came. You brought me back to life." "We brought each other back to life," she corrected. "You taught me that I could be loved for who I truly am, not who I pretend to be. That is a precious gift." That night, after Emma was asleep and the house was quiet, Florence carried Jane over the threshold of their bedroom, the master bedroom he had barely used since Margaret's death. Jane had transformed it over the past week, bringing in fresh linens and curtains, making it theirs rather than a shrine to the past. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a discovery of each other that left them both breathless and amazed. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, Florence said, "I want more children, if you do too." "I do. I want to fill this house with love and laughter." "Emma will be thrilled. She has been asking for siblings since she could talk," Jane laughed. "Then we should probably give her what she wants." The winter passed in a haze of happiness. Jane continued to teach Emma, but now she also took on more responsibilities around the ranch, proving to have a good head for business. She suggested improvements to the breeding program, helped negotiate better prices for their cattle, and won the respect of the ranch hands through a combination of intelligence and fairness. In February, Jane discovered she was pregnant. Florence was elated, Emma was beside herself with excitement, and even the ranch hands congratulated them with genuine warmth. The pregnancy was difficult at times. Jane suffered from morning sickness that lasted all day, and Florence worried constantly, haunted by memories of Margaret's death. But Jane was stronger than she looked, and the doctor from Fort Bowie assured them that everything was progressing normally. Emma became fiercely protective of Jane, insisting she rest and bringing her water and crackers when the nausea was bad. The bond between stepmother and daughter deepened further, and Florence often found them with their heads together, talking about the coming baby. "Do you hope for a boy or a girl?" Jane asked him one evening as they sat on the porch, her hand resting on her swelling belly. "I just hope for healthy. But if I had to choose, maybe a boy this time, a son to help with the ranch." "Emma can help with the ranch too," he smiled. "You are right, she can. She is already a better rider than most of my men. She is extraordinary. You did well with her, Florence." "We are doing well with her," he corrected. "She is as much yours now as mine." Jane's eyes filled with tears, the pregnancy making her more emotional than usual. "I love her so much. I never expected to love someone else's child like my own, but I do. She loves you too. She told me the other day that she is glad her first mama went to heaven so I could marry you. I did not know whether to laugh or cry. Children have such pure hearts. Jane wiped her eyes. They accept what is and make the best of it. In early September, as the year turned toward autumn again, Jane went into labor. Florence sent Walt racing to town for the doctor while he stayed with Jane, holding her hand and trying to hide his terror. Emma sat outside the bedroom door, refusing to leave despite Florence's urging. "I want to be here when the baby comes," she insisted. The labor was long and difficult. Florence relived every moment of Margaret's death, convinced he was about to lose Jane too. But as the sun rose on a new day, his son was born, squalling and healthy and perfect. Jane was exhausted but alive, her face radiant as the doctor placed the baby in her arms. Florence sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed with relief and joy. "He is beautiful," Jane whispered. "What should we name him?" "I was thinking Frank, after my grandfather." "Frank Freeman," she smiled. "I like it, strong and straightforward like his father." Emma was allowed in to meet her brother and she stared at him with wonder. "He is so small. Can I hold him?" Florence supervised carefully as Emma cradled the baby, her face serious with the responsibility. "Hello, Frank," she said softly. "I am your big sister Emma, and I am going to teach you everything I know." Over the next few months, the household adjusted to the new addition. Jane managed motherhood and teaching with remarkable grace, though she admitted to Florence in private that she was more tired than she had ever been in her life. "We could hire someone to help," he suggested. "You do not have to do everything." "I want to do it. I just need to find my rhythm." Emma proved to be a devoted big sister, always ready to help with Frank and endlessly patient with his crying. Jane continued her lessons, sometimes with Frank sleeping in a basket beside them, and Emma's education progressed wonderfully. When Frank was 6 months old, Jane surprised Florence by suggesting they expand the school. "There are other children in the area who need education. What if we opened our home a few days a week to teach them? Are you sure you want to take that on?" "I am a teacher, Florence. It is who I am, and I have more to give than just lessons for one child. Besides, Emma would benefit from having other students around." So the Freeman Ranch became home to a small school 3 days a week. Children from neighboring ranches and Fort Bowie attended, and Jane taught them with the same dedication she had shown Emma. Florence built an addition to the house, a proper schoolroom with desks and a chalkboard, and Jane was in her element. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Frank grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. Emma blossomed into a confident young woman, her education far exceeding what most girls in the territory received. The school flourished, and Jane became a respected figure in the community. In 1882, when Frank was 3 and Emma was 12, Jane became pregnant again. This time, Florence was less terrified, trusting in Jane's strength and the doctor's skill. Their daughter was born in April, a tiny thing with blonde hair like Emma and a temperament that was pure determination. "She reminds me of you," Florence told Jane as they watched their daughter sleep. "Beautiful and stubborn. We should name her Margaret after Emma's mother." He was surprised by the gesture. "Are you sure? She was Emma's mother, and Emma should have that connection to her. Besides, I think it would mean something to Emma." He was right. When they told Emma the baby's name, she cried and hugged Jane tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for honoring her." "She gave me the greatest gift by giving me you," Jane said simply. "I wanted to acknowledge that." Little Margaret, who they called Maggie, was adored by the entire household. Emma doted on her baby sister, Frank was fascinated by her tiny fingers and toes, and Jane and Florence fell in love all over again watching their family grow. In 1885, Jane announced she was pregnant once more. Florence was 40 years old now, his hair starting to show silver at the temples, but he felt younger than he had in his youth. This pregnancy resulted in twin boys, which sent the household into cheerful chaos. "We are going to need a bigger house," Jane said, nursing one baby while Florence held the other. "Or we could stop having children," he suggested with a laugh. "Where is the fun in that?" They named the twins James and John, and the ranch house expanded again to accommodate the growing family. Emma, now 15, was an enormous help with her younger siblings. She had become a beautiful young woman, smart and capable, already drawing the attention of young men from the surrounding ranches. "I do not want to marry for years yet," she told Jane firmly. "I want to go to college like you always said I could." "Then you shall," Jane assured her. "We will find a way." Florence was less enthusiastic about the idea of Emma leaving for college, but Jane convinced him. "We raised her to be independent and educated. We cannot hold her back now because we will miss her. I will miss her terribly, so will I, but we will be proud of her too." In 1887, Emma left for a women's college in California, the first person from Fort Bowie to pursue higher education. The house felt empty without her, but she wrote faithfully every week, and her letters were full of excitement about her studies. Jane continued running the school, now with several other teachers she had trained to help her. Frank was 7 and already showing signs of his father's skill with horses. Maggie was 5 and convinced she could do anything her brothers could do, only better. The twins were 2 and into everything. Florence looked at his life and could hardly believe the transformation. 10 years ago, he had been a lonely widower struggling to raise one daughter alone. Now his house overflowed with children and love and laughter. His ranch prospered, his wife was respected throughout the territory, and he woke each morning grateful for another day. One evening, after the children were finally asleep, Florence and Jane sat on the porch as they had so many times before. She leaned against him, tired but content. "Did you ever imagine this when you answered my advertisement?" he asked. "Not in my wildest dreams. I thought I would teach one child and live quietly on the edge of civilization. Instead, I found love, family, purpose, everything I had stopped believing was possible for someone like me. Someone like you, a woman with opinions and ambitions. A woman who wanted more than society said she should have." He kissed the top of her head. "You taught me how to love again. I was dead inside, just going through the motions. You brought me back to life. You did the same for me. In Boston, I was slowly suffocating under the weight of expectations. Here I can breathe." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. In the distance, a coyote called and somewhere an owl hooted. The sounds of the desert that had once seemed harsh and unforgiving now felt like home. "I love you, Jane Freeman." "I love you too, Florence Freeman. Today, tomorrow, and all the days after that." Inside, one of the twins started crying and they both laughed. "Our life is not exactly peaceful," Jane said, standing. "No." Florence rose too, following her inside. "But it is perfect anyway." The years continued to pass. Emma graduated from college and returned to Fort Bowie, where she took over running the school from Jane, who was ready to step back and focus on her own children. Emma had become an even more accomplished teacher than her stepmother, and the school grew under her leadership. Frank grew into a young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, and it was clear he would take over the operation one day. Maggie surprised everyone by developing a passion for veterinary medicine, inspired by caring for the ranch animals. The twins were inseparable, always into some scheme or adventure. In 1895, Emma married a young lawyer who had moved to Fort Bowie, a kind man who appreciated her intelligence and independence. Jane and Florence watched their eldest daughter marry with hearts full of pride and joy. "We did well with her," Florence said as they danced at the wedding reception. "You did well with her long before I arrived. I just helped her continue growing. Do not diminish your role. She is who she is because of both of us." As they grew older, Florence and Jane settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch was prosperous. Their children were thriving, and they had built a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. The school Emma ran now educated children from across the territory, and the Freeman name was synonymous with education and integrity. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Florence took Jane back to the spot where he had proposed. It was a clear November evening, crisp and perfect, the stars beginning to emerge overhead. 20 years, Jane marveled. It has gone so fast. Best 20 years of my life, mine too. She turned to face him, her hair now threaded with silver but her eyes as green and bright as ever. "Do you remember what you said when you proposed? You said you had been dead inside before I came. I meant it. I know you did. And I want you to know that you saved me too. I was withering away in Boston, becoming bitter and small. You gave me a life beyond anything I had imagined. You gave me love, children, purpose, a home. You gave me everything." He pulled her close, holding her tight. "We gave each other everything." They kissed as the stars wheeled overhead. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life together that exceeded their wildest dreams. As they walked back to the house, hand in hand, they could hear the sounds of their family inside. Frank was playing guitar while Maggie sang. The twins were arguing about something, and Emma had stopped by with her husband and their new baby, Florence and Jane's first grandchild. "Listen to that," Jane said, pausing at the door. "The sound of a full life. Our life." Florence opened the door, and they stepped inside together, into the warmth and light and love they had built together. The house that had once been so quiet and lonely now rang with voices and laughter. Children and grandchildren filled every room, and Florence looked at Jane, seeing not the young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach 20 years ago, but the woman she had become, his partner in everything, the love of his life. "Thank you," he said softly, "for answering that advertisement, for taking a chance on a lonely rancher and his daughter, for loving me." "Thank you for seeing me," Jane replied, "for loving all of me, not just the parts that were convenient, for building this life with me." They joined their family in the main room, and as Florence looked around at the faces of his children and grandchildren, he felt overwhelming gratitude. He had almost given up on love, convinced it was not meant for him. But Jane had taught him that love could come when you least expected it, that it was never too late to open your heart, and that the greatest adventures often began with the smallest steps. The advertisement he had placed in that dusty window all those years ago had been born of desperation, a last attempt to give his daughter what she needed. He could never have imagined that it would bring him Jane, and with her, a whole new life. As the evening wore on and the family talked and laughed together, Florence caught Jane's eye across the room. She smiled at him, that special smile reserved just for him, and he felt his heart swell with love. 20 years, 5 children, 1 grandchild and counting, a thriving ranch, a successful school, and a love that had only grown deeper with time. The young widower who had desperately needed a teacher for his daughter had found so much more. He had found his soulmate, his partner, his everything. And Jane, the independent woman from Boston who had traveled across the country seeking freedom and purpose, had found her home. Not in a place, but in the family they had built together, in the man who loved her completely, in the life they had created from nothing but hope and determination. Later that night, long after everyone had gone home or to bed, Florence and Jane stood on the porch one last time, looking out at the land that had been witness to their love story. "No regrets?" he asked, as he sometimes still did. "Not a single one." Jane leaned against him, fitting perfectly in his arms. "This life, this family, you are everything I ever wanted and everything I never knew to dream of. I love you, Jane Harper Freeman. And I love you, Florence Freeman, today, tomorrow, and forever." They stood together under the vast Arizona sky, two souls who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life of love and purpose and joy. The rancher who had needed a teacher for his daughter had learned the greatest lesson of all, that love could heal even the deepest wounds, that opening your heart was always worth the risk, and that sometimes the best things in life came from the most unexpected places. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were loved. Outside, the desert night wrapped around the ranch like a blanket, protective and familiar. And on the porch, Florence and Jane held each other close, grateful for every moment, every challenge, every joy that had brought them to this perfect place. Their love story had begun with a simple advertisement and a desperate need. It had grown through patience, understanding, and the courage to be vulnerable. And it would continue through their children and grandchildren, a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. But for now, in this moment, they had everything they needed. Each other, their family, and a love that had taught them both how to truly live. The stars shone overhead, constant and eternal, bearing witness to the happiness below. And in the house that love built, all was well.